It would be really bad if you were full size on the screen, though, Josh.
What's that?
If you were full size?
If I were full size? I'm supposed to sit up there? I'm going to be blinded by it.
Yeah, you can sit there if you want, and stand up here. I'm going to get out of the way very, very quickly.
All right.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. This merry band, a few, but
These are the good ones.
dedicated, smart, and
We don't need the rest of those ones.
we very much. That's right. Very much appreciate you attending. My name is Steve Hoftak. I'm the executive director of the Rappaport Institute, and on behalf of the institute, we'd like to welcome you to the Kennedy School to hear the presentation on the impact of the Adams Scholarship on degree attainment in Massachusetts. Part of the price of admission. Just a quick ad about the Rappaport Institute, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. We are dedicated to improving governance in Greater Boston, and we do that a couple different ways. We run a fellows program. To the extent that we have anyone who's a graduate student here, or perhaps thinking of being a graduate student, we have a fellows program. If you want to be engaged in a public policy internship over the summer during the master's program, we will fund you. Come to our website, learn about it, and apply. We'd love to. We've shown already with data that we actually get people to stay in Boston and stay engaged in public policy at a far higher rate than the rest of the Kennedy School population through this program. So it's a great way to begin to get engaged in public policy. We also do research at the Rappaport Institute. We're going to have a paper coming out on the Boston School assignment, some of the data, Boston School assignment process, and some of the data that's come out with that. We're going to have that coming out as soon as I fix all the errors in the paper that Professor Goodman has pointed out. Lastly, we conduct a series of seminars to talk about public policy issues affecting Boston and the region, and you're at one now. And please do sign up for our mailing list if you'd like to know about more of them. We will be holding them throughout the upcoming year. We're hoping to do one in the spring on gambling, hoping to do a couple on transit, and a number of other topics. So please do join us. So with the ad out of the way, I'd like to briefly introduce our two speakers tonight. First, we have Professor Goodman, who is an assistant professor of public policy here at the Kennedy School, whose studies focus on labor and public economics, with a particular interest in education policy. And that's what we'll be covering. Today. Professor Goodman holds a BA in physics from Harvard, a master's in philosophy from Cambridge, and a PhD in economics from Columbia. But I think most importantly, he was a math teacher in the Watertown Public Schools for 2 years as well before beginning his PhD studies. So he is well positioned.
This is the first job I've had for more than 2 years.
Congratulations. I'd also like to introduce our respondent, Representative Tom Sannicandro. He's a representative from the 7th Middlesex District, which is all of Ashland and 7 precincts in Framingham.
I think it's 6 now with redistricting, because, yeah.
Okay. As long as you keep the base in Ashland, I think that's the important stuff. He joins us from the legislature, where he is the chair of the Joint Committee on Higher Education. Can bring that particular insight to this discussion. He holds a law degree from Suffolk University and continues to have a private practice. He attended Holy Cross. He served in the House since 2005, and previous to that, he spent 4 years on the Ashland School Committee, and some additional experience as well. And he's an adjunct professor at Bentley and Framingham State, and he serves on the board of directors of several organizations, including the Metro West Parents of Children with Down Syndrome and the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress. And we're delighted that you could join us tonight. Thank you for your generosity. And with that, I will cede the floor to Professor Goodman.
Well, thanks very much for coming out. Given the size of the group, I really would like to treat this, and I think you'll be okay with this too, just as much of an interactive discussion as we can make it. I'm going to show you some arguments about some data that we've been analyzing recently, but please don't be shy about interrupting if something's unclear. This is a nice group for a good discussion. This is research that I've done along with Sarah Cahodes, who's a doctoral student here, who's absolutely stellar, and has often worked on some other great projects, but she's an integral part of this. So very quickly, I just want to thank the Rappaport Institute and the Taubman Center for State and Local Government here, including Steve and Glazer, for a lot of the support that has helped bring this project to fruition. This could not have happened without the Strategic Data Project at the Graduate School of Education that is run by Tom Kane, John Fullerton, where all the data is housed, and then Carrie Conway, who's actually here from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has been amazingly helpful at giving researchers access to the kind of data to answer important questions in Massachusetts. So let me just start by saying that we are going to be looking at a handful of questions in this research paper. Hi, Jessica. And the first and sort of most obvious one that we started with is what is the impact of the Adams Scholarship on students' college enrollment decisions and college graduation rates? And given the results we see, does this make sense as a state program, as a good use of state revenue? And then the thing that we're sort of pushing in this paper is we think that the results we're going to show you actually tell us something a little bit deeper about the role that college quality plays on students' chances of completing college, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And I want to start by stressing something really important here. I'm going to talk in this talk about college quality, particularly near the end. There are a lot of different ways to measure it. It turns out that almost no matter how you measure college quality, you sort of end up with the same results. It doesn't really matter what variables you use. They tend to be really correlated with each other, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. We're going to measure college quality in this paper as a mixture of incoming student skill, funding levels available to the universities, and their ultimate graduation rates of students. If you accept that measure as sort of a decent set of things you would think about when you think about college quality, the Umass campus is a state college. Those state colleges look of relatively low quality relative to the alternative colleges available to Massachusetts students. And I want to be very clear when I say that they are relatively low quality. It could mean one of two things. One is that it could mean that those institutions could be serving their students better. I'm going to show you that their graduation rates look very, very low, but it might not be that they may be doing the best job they can possibly be doing given the set of students and the set of resources that are available to them through the state and through the tuition that they charge. So I just want to be very clear that when we talk about quality, it's not a judgment necessarily about how the institutions are run. It may reflect something about the constraints the institutions face, and we don't have a great way of disentangling those yet. Yeah,
Since we're doing
yeah,
this
let's
as a
be
demo.
interactive.
So,
Yeah.
I guess one of the things for me as a representative of the system in some ways, and actually hearing from the system,
Yeah.
and obviously their skin crawls at using the term of low quality, right?
Yep.
So that's
Yep. Yeah.
sort of politically
Dangerous.
incorrect or
Yeah.
whatever we
Yep.
are. But the other issue that I think of when we look at public institutions and we look at how do we serve the public here in Massachusetts, we have a great many students that come from maybe systems that didn't prepare them as well as should have. And I'm not sure, so if you look at the issue, when you look at the mixture of incoming student skill, that's the issue that concerns me, is because these folks, maybe they have the innate abilities that they should have and could be stellar students, but they may not have been as adequately prepared as they could have been.
This is a really critical point. I'm glad you brought it up now, because actually what I'm going to tell you is that the goal of our research is to actually disentangle the following two stories, and I'm sort of skipping ahead a slide. In fact, maybe I will skip ahead a slide, in fact, so we might as well get to the story. And here's sort of and so let me come back to this in about 30 seconds. So the thing we worry about in the U.S. is that our college completion rates are now actually lower than they were a few decades ago. And there are roughly two big explanations, although you can come up with more that people often talk about. One is that as college access expands to larger parts of the population, and as we have had other changes in our elementary and secondary systems, maybe the students now coming into college are actually less well prepared than they were in the past. So that's sort of one possibility, is it's something about the students' academic preparation. Another possibility is that something's actually just going wrong with the institutions themselves. And we are actually, and so the challenge is it's very hard to distinguish, is it something about the incoming students that's the challenge, or the institutions themselves not doing the best they can be doing with the material that they get coming in. And it's really hard to distinguish those things because different kinds of students pick different kinds of colleges to go to, and so it's very hard to disentangle these stories. What I will say is that there has been some recent evidence, I think, that the colleges themselves are actually at least a part of the story. So I think there are people out there who would say this is all about the incoming students' preparation, and what we're going to do in this paper is say, we think we have some proof that it's not just about students' academic preparation. That might be part of the story, but we found something else. And let me just say, some prior research, relatively recent, has argued that you can explain, at least statistically, some of this decline in completion rates by the fact that funding for public higher education has generally been dropping, and more kids have been crowding into the sector. So that's sort of one interesting story, which is not a story about student skills, but about the kinds of institutions they're attending and the resources available to those institutions. The other, I think, really critical fact, which is really interesting, is that you can take colleges with very similar student bodies and see that they can actually have very different graduation rates. And so this already suggests that there's something about different institutions may be doing something different, and some of them are doing a little better than others. So what we're going to do in this paper is what we think is provide clear evidence that there's actually something about the colleges, something going on at the college level, and not just about the incoming students that's going to be an interesting phenomenon here. Yeah.
Are you going to address how you disentangle how different colleges, how easy it is to actually graduate those schools?
Let's get back. Ask that question again near the end and see if I've answered it or not. That's an interesting question.
I just Josh, to go back one more thing. Yeah. So the other issue, actually, I was fortunate enough to go to college in the 70s, and then my kids.
And you completed it.
I completed it in 4 years and didn't think it was a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
Since I got this job, I now know it was relatively a big deal. Maybe it wasn't such a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
But for one of the issues, there's two major issues, I think. One is the financial issue. So I actually had to pay for college myself, and I did get financial aid. But in one summer, there's, I guess, a lot of points. One summer I made $3,500, and my college tuition bill was around $4,000. So the ability to make enough money in a summer to pay for college was phenomenal. The other thing is we actually had we have a Massachusetts state grant, and when I got it, it was $900 to attend a private institution here in Massachusetts. So if you can imagine $900 going to a $4,000 bill, that's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah.
Our numbers are pretty similar to they were in the 1970s on that Massachusetts grant.
Right, so, but the tuition and fees.
Right, the tuitions are 10 times that,
sure.
But the number is about the same. So that's an issue. And I think that the society itself, if you look at the society and the way kids grow up and the way things are, not that we were with June Cleaver, or hopefully some people understand that reference in this room, but
I've seen reruns on the
So, but I think there's a difference in the society that also impacts these kids as they go through this.
So the heart of this paper is going to be an analysis where we actually find two basically identical sets of kids, but one of which goes off to the Umass system and the other doesn't. And so we're sort of going to be controlling for things like that. So maybe hold off. Okay. All of these absolutely true for the big picture. These are all important. I think for the analysis we're doing, we might be able to deal with some of these issues. Okay. So let's see. Here's the Adams Scholarship. For those who don't know the details, it was proposed by Governor Romney in his State of the Commonwealth address in January 2004. It becomes a policy of the Board of Higher Education applying to the graduating high school class of 2005 and beyond. The way you win an Adams Scholarship is, it must be the case that on your 10th grade MCAS exam, 3 things have to be true. You have to score advanced in one section, at least proficient or advanced in the other, and your score must be in the top 25% of kids in your school district. So, roughly speaking, the way to think of this is it's going to be a scholarship that's going to the top 25% of kids in each school district, with the added sort of caveat that they also have to pass these absolute thresholds. What happens if you're a winner of this thing is that you receive a letter in the fall of your senior year telling you that tuition will be waived for you if you attend an in-state public college full-time. In-state public college, in this case, the eligible ones are 4 University of Massachusetts campuses, 9 state colleges, they're now called state universities, and 15 community colleges. It sounds like a very generous thing on the surface of a tuition waiver. Some of you may or may not know that in Massachusetts, at these institutions, the maximum tuition you ever pay, I believe, is at Umass Amherst, where you would pay about $1,700 a year, because the rest of the costs are something called fees, which are not covered by this waiver, but are mandatory and function exactly like tuition. So this scholarship covers less than 20% of the sticker price of college, and that doesn't include rooming costs, I should say. So this is just a quick graph over the last decade of tuition at Umass Amherst. It's been relatively flat, and maybe relatively is the wrong word. Perfectly flat has been constant over the last decade. And fees have been rising very dramatically. In any other state, all of this would just be bundled together in something called tuition. In Massachusetts, it's not, and therefore this scholarship takes care of this portion of the entire bill. So, it's not a trivial amount of money, but in the grand scheme of college costs, $1,700 a year is actually not a terribly high fraction. This is just an example of a letter that kids get, just to give you a sense of what happens. This was the first class of students who received the letter, boldface underline, you get 4 years of free tuition, and and then a paragraph describing that this was about rewarding hard work and achievement and encouraging students to go to a public higher education institution in the state. So there were sort of multiple goals of this program: incentivize achievement, keep kids in state, improve the quality of higher education in the state by attracting a high caliber student. There was some anger, I think, after this first year when certain parents felt a little bit deceived by this language because it seems more generous than it is when you sort of drill down. And so the next year, a line was, so 4 years of free tuition, still boldface and underlined, but a line was added talking about college fees and rooming costs not being included, so it's at least a little bit clearer if the parents read all the way down. And then this most recent year, it points out that you also have to make sure you apply and get accepted, which turns out not to be very hard. Most of the kids who win this would be accepted to these institutions because they're very high-scoring kids in general, and sort of moves the sentence about what exactly is covered closer to the top, so hopefully people are more likely to read it. The governor no longer signs the letter. In case you haven't noticed, Romney's signature was on it, and Governor Patrick's is not. So that's the letter that kids get. So here's what we're going to do in this study, and this is sort of the key thing that I better get across to sort of make this very clear. We can, using MCAS scores, construct a measure of how far away a kid was from qualifying for this scholarship. Did they get 10, did they miss it by 10 points? Did they have 10 extra points? If they had lost those 10 points, they still would have won it? Or did they get exactly the score they needed to win it based on what district they were from? So we can basically compute how far away are you from winning the scholarship. And what we're going to do is compare students who barely qualified, meaning the kids who got exactly the score they needed to get to win this, to the kids who just missed by basically 1 point on the MCAS exam. It's actually 2 points because that's what the grading scheme is, but who missed by the sort of minimum number of points qualifying for this thing. So these are two sets of kids who basically have almost identical test scores, and it turns out when you look at them on average, they're identical in every way. They look the same in terms of low income status, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender. If we could see things like motivation and family situation, we have reasons to believe that they would be the same. And so we are sort of thinking of this as a real, what we call a natural experiment. We've got two groups of kids who are otherwise identical, except that one gets this scholarship to go to Umass or state colleges. For those who care, this is a regression discontinuity approach. We're going to focus on the first 3 graduating high school classes that are eligible for this thing because we can watch them up to 4 years later given our data. And we're going to focus on 4-year colleges here. I'm going to tell you that 2-year colleges are not a huge part of the story because these are such high-achieving kids that they tend to think of 4-year colleges as the default option. We study the 2-year colleges, but it's just not worth talking about them in the short time we have. Here's the graph that tells the sort of central story we want to tell. What we've done is down here what you see is how many points away from winning the Adams Scholarship was a given kid. So a kid right here at -2 just missed the scholarship, whereas a kid at 0 had exactly the right number of points to win the scholarship. And what we've graphed is for each group of kids, the fraction of them, and so that's these dots up here, the fraction of them enrolling in a UMass campus or a state college. And the way to read this graph is this dot tells you that for kids who just barely missed winning the Adams Scholarship, about 25% of them end up enrolling in a UMass campus or a state college. Whereas kids who just scored, basically got 1 extra question right on the MCAS and won the Adams Scholarship as a result, about 33% of them go off to 4-year public colleges in state. And so this really big jump here is unexpected because these two sets of kids are basically the same sets of kids, except that one won the scholarship and the other didn't. And so we're going to take this jump as evidence that the scholarship was changing their decision about where to go to college.
Does this also tell us that of the students who got the scholarship, only 33% actually went to a 4-year college?
No.
Went to
one of these. Actually, so that's a great question. So what you actually see is that this line is sort of going down. So the winners are all the people over here, and actually there are even more out here. So the really super high scoring kids are sort of all the way over here. And the really super high scoring kids tend to focus on sort of elite private colleges. So actually that's why this line is going down over here. So it's actually less than 33% of the total population of winners ends up using the scholarship. That's a great question. The other thing I just want to draw your attention to is that this line down here is the fraction of each of these sets of kids who actually graduate from college 4 years later from one of these in-state public colleges. And what you can see is that there's this big discontinuity, about an 8 percentage point gap here, but a much smaller one here. And what that's going to tell you is that a lot of the kids who change their mind about where to go to college don't end up graduating from that college. Yeah?
Fraction of the whole or fraction of the people that
fraction of the people who, in this little bin of test scores. Meaning, so this is, so what, the way to read this is about 12% of people who just won the scholarship, who had exactly the right score, end up graduating from one of these colleges, even though 33% actually go off to start them.
Okay.
Right?
So it's not 11% of the 30%. It's
No.
This
This is right. So this is so yeah. This is 11 compared to 33. So it's 1/3 of those students end up graduating.
I'm not quite sure I understand this.
Okay.
So,
I can turn it into words in the next slide if it would be helpful.
I don't know, I think
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
better off with the
Okay.
picture,
Yeah.
actually.
Okay.
So if you look at, so the line that's on the bottom with, is, those are the students that scored 2 points below.
Yes.
Let's look at that dot right there,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that's the graduation rate, right
Yes.
there next to them?
Yes.
That-
Right.
like,
So
if
they
you
have sort
look-
of they have like a 10% graduation rate, and these guys maybe have a 12% graduation rate. This is
Okay.
from. This is just did you graduate from an in-state public college? I'm going to show you in a second a graph of did you graduate from anywhere, and that's a slightly different
Okay.
story. So right, these are only the kids who are going off to the Umass or state college campuses. So I'm just trying to get a picture of did this increase the number of kids showing up on the Umass campuses? I'm going to show you a separate picture of where did that mean that they were coming into college for the first time, or they were just giving up a private college to exchange for it?
I still don't understand the bottom. The top line is they chose to go to the public system, right?
Yes, they
Because of the others.
enrolled, yeah, that's
Because-
right.
But I don't understand the bottom line.
The bottom line is did they graduate 4 years later from these Adams-eligible colleges, these in-state public colleges?
Okay, so, but that's pretty flat, right?
The-
On both sides, actually. right?
It's pretty flat, but the thing I want you to focus on is the discontinuity. Because the experiment is comparing these kids to these kids. That's where, so I'm going to focus on how big is this gap here. So it changes, it seems to have a big impact going from here all the way up to there of where you enroll, and a much smaller impact of
Improving graduation.
of changing graduation rates. All right, but so now hold on. So the English summary of this is that eligibility for the scholarship convinces about 8% of students to enroll at in-state public colleges. So that's a pretty big number, given that this is not a gigantic amount of money. Of those 8%, about 1/3 are going off to UMass Amherst, 1/3 are going off to the other UMass campuses, and another 1/3 are picking state colleges, just to give you a sense of distribution. It turns out many of these kids would have actually enrolled out of state. So in that sense, it's actually sort of helping in terms of brain drain, at least in bringing kids in-state for that initial college enrollment. But as I said, as we saw on this graph before, when you look at actual graduation, it turns out only about 1/4 of these new students being brought into the system end up graduating 4 years later. And so our takeaways from this part of this graph is that A, students are surprisingly responsive to what seems like a relatively small amount of money. As a result, the scholarship is fairly effective at pulling kids into the public system, but it turns out there's a lot of slippage between enrollment and completion. And so what we want to do now is ask, well, let's just look at the big picture. Are these kids graduating from any college at all? Maybe they're transferring, for example, to another college.
They were duped by Romney's letter.
So there are people, right. So this is the other sort of part of the paper, which is now the outcome is, let's not worry about exactly where you enrolled, just did you enroll in any 4-year college? And what you see here is actually this graph shows almost no bump up here. And the way to interpret this is, even though there was a big change in the number of kids going to in-state public colleges, basically all of them would have been going to private colleges otherwise. And so this doesn't really draw new kids into college. So that's sort of fact one. And even maybe, so that's not such a damning thing. That wasn't necessarily the goal of the program. But the more sort of exciting, depressing, however you want to put it, feature is if you look at the question, what fraction of kids with these kind of test scores had any kind of college degree 4 years later from any college, public or private, it turns out that it looks like winning the scholarship, meaning these kids, actually reduces the probability that they graduate from college. So these kids have a lower graduation rate than the kids who just barely missed winning the scholarship. And so this is the sort of surprising and at first counterintuitive finding that really got us thinking, what the heck is going on here? It's rare in economics that we see situations where you give someone the option to do something and they seem to end up worse off as a result of that. That's not a usual situation. So you know, again, just to emphasize, what we see is this is saying that the number of kids who just barely won the Adams Scholarship who graduate from any college within 4 years is actually lower than for the kids who didn't win the Adams Scholarship.
And where did those other kids go, I guess, is the other question.
Great, this is a great,
You're
no, you're good, and we're almost done, so then we can actually, but so, Again, in English, scholarship has little impact on overall college enrollment rates because nearly all the kids who switch into these public colleges would have attended college somewhere else. And then here's the way to think about the figures I've shown you. Of the 8% of students we see switching into these in-state public colleges, I keep calling them Adams colleges, 2 of the 8 graduate on time, so that's a fairly low on-time graduation rate. 4 of the 8 don't graduate on time, but we can actually show that they wouldn't have graduated no matter what college they went to, right? In general, we have college completion problems. It's not just limited to the public sector in Massachusetts. But the thing that's generating that strange result that I showed you in the previous graph is that 2 of these 8 don't graduate on time from in-state public colleges, but it turns out they would have if they had gone to the college that they would have picked in the absence of the Adams Scholarship. And that's sort of how the numbers work out. So this is where the quote-unquote damage is being done, is that there's a set of students who seem to actually be harmed by coming onto the UMass campuses instead of picking the option they would have picked in the absence of the scholarship. The bottom line, somewhat sadly, is that the scholarship eligibility reduces graduation rates, which is, again, maybe counterintuitive, and the big question now is why? What's going on there? And that is the sort of last thing I'm going to talk about here. And I just wanted to show you some basic statistics comparing the UMass and state college sectors to the colleges that Massachusetts students tend to pick outside of the public sector. This is actually for the graduating class of 2004, just before the scholarship ever kicked in. And what you see is that the University of Massachusetts campus has a 34% on-time graduation rate relative to the sort of private sector's 53% on-time graduation rate. UMass actually gets pretty smart kids relative to the private sector. Not a big difference in SAT scores, so the quality of students actually seems pretty high, but they're still getting these low graduation rates. So the question is, what's going on? Well, one of the things that we suspect is going on is if you look at the amount of money that these institutions spend on instruction, because what's the amount of money they have available, it's only slightly more than half of what the private sector has to spend on instruction. And so you might think that means larger class sizes, less access to coursework, etc. We can't separately figure out which of these factors is really driving things, but the point is the University of Massachusetts campuses, and even more so the state colleges, by these various measures look somewhat worse than the private sector. But of course, as it's important to point out, they are also much less expensive and therefore more accessible to a wide range of the population. And so the question is that trade-off worth it for kids? This is sort of the second to last thing I'll say here. The sort of conclusion that we come to is to provide some evidence that the kids who are switching into the UMass campus because of the Adams Scholarship, a high fraction, about 2/5, turn out to be giving up opportunities to go to more selective colleges, as Barron's would tell you, although our measures also would sort of point in the same direction. No matter how you measure it, the switchers into the UMass campuses and state colleges are sacrificing something in terms of the colleges they're giving up. They end up on campuses with lower graduation rates, lower instructional expenditures, and lower peer SAT scores than the colleges they otherwise would have attended. And you might think, well, maybe that doesn't matter, because maybe all that matters for student success is what I bring to my college. But what we're showing you here with the graphs we showed you is that you take these 2 nearly identical sets of students with very similar academic preparation, put one in the UMass campus and one in the sort of private or out-of-state alternative they would have selected, and the one on the UMass campus actually has a lower probability of graduating. That's sort of the disturbing piece of this. And so that's sort of how we conclude that we think that there's something about colleges, the institutions, and we're calling it college quality, but again, I'm very agnostic about exactly what it is about the colleges that's doing this, but the colleges themselves seem to affect graduation rates even when you compare students of similar academic skill. So I'm going to just do the, yeah.
Can you step back to the graph again?
Yes. This, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So what we're looking at there, right? So if we look between -2 and 2, right?
Yep. From
We're looking
or
at
even
scores,
-2 and 0.
we're looking at the passing, or the
That's
ability
right.
to get to win the Adams Scholarship.
So these kids got exactly the minimum score they needed to win, and these kids
Right.
just missed getting it.
Right.
So these kids are actually a little bit academically more talented than those kids.
2 points on the MCAS.
It's small, I don't disagree,
Right.
but the point is you would predict,
That
if you
line would
follow
be
this line
slightly
up, you
right.
would predict that these kids should be graduating at this rate, but instead they're graduating at a lower rate. So if you sort of follow this line, you wouldn't have guessed that suddenly it jumped down like that. That's the way to think of this. So that's a surprising thing, that even though these kids are actually a little bit more academically talented, they're actually graduating at lower rates.
And what is that? That's 2%, is that what you said that is?
This gap here is about 2%. It's a small number, but on the other hand, only 8% of kids are switching, so it's 2 out of 8, so it's a quarter of the switchers, basically. Yeah?
2% include all universities, colleges, and community colleges?
So here we're focused on 4-year college outcomes.
Umass.
So so the way to read the height of this dot is, of kids who got exactly the score that qualified them for the Adams Scholarship, about 38% earned a 4-year degree somewhere within 4 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So grand conclusion, and then we can just talk. From our calculations, although it's actually hard to figure this out budgetarily, given the fact that this is a tuition waiver, so there's no budget line for this, right? It's just foregone revenue for the state. This is costing the state about $25 million a year in foregone tuition. It's not a trivial amount of money. About 3/4 of that money actually flows to students who would have attended the Umass campuses anyway, even if the scholarship didn't exist. Whether you think that's a problem or not, I leave to you. It doesn't do much. The program doesn't do much to increase the in-state production of college degrees. By our calculations, the best number we could come up with is that it's costing the state about $80,000 a year to keep one more student in state. That seems like a high number. But it actually reduces the number of kids earning college degrees overall. The central challenge here is that the Massachusetts public colleges have low on-time graduation rates. Now, some of that is that kids are taking longer. They take 5 or 6 years. But even if you look out 6 years, the Massachusetts colleges have lower graduation rates than you'd want them to have and than the private sector has. We can't pinpoint exactly what it is about the public campuses that's driving this. We are very sympathetic to the notion that the fact that these campuses have much less money to play with than a lot of the private sector campuses do could be a very important part of the problem. There's a ton of anecdotal evidence about students having trouble accessing the coursework necessary to complete their degrees and being in large classes that might make it hard for them to succeed academically. We're actually engaged right now in some research to hope to explore very specifically the question of whether access to courses on campus is an important part of the story, which might provide some direct evidence about the importance of things like student-faculty ratios and funding levels. The giant takeaway we take from this is that if you want to improve college completion rates, it's not going to be enough just to improve the academic preparation of high school students. We also have to figure out what is going wrong on these campuses and work to fix that. And in our mind, the scholarship just doesn't seem to be particularly addressing that fact. But I'll stop now so that we can, I don't know if you have structured remarks.
I might have some. I actually need to use the podium, and I apologize for this. I have notes, and I have to actually refer to my notes in order to talk.
You don't want to project your notes all the way.
I should have done that, actually. I should have done that. But thank you for inviting me here today to address Josh's findings. And obviously a lot of this we can't disagree with, but I think there's some things that I think we need to look at and we need to think about as we move ahead. There's sort of the fundamental issue. The very fundamental issue is that when we look at and we compare public colleges and public institutions to privates is the money, right? And you did mention that. You mentioned how we've been tailing off on the amount of money that we put towards public institutions. I haven't done any research on this, but at least in Massachusetts, we've seen a substantial drop in the funding of public institutions over the since 2002. So we've seen this tremendous gap in funding, and that's a huge issue. I do have some data here, which I didn't project up on the screen, but it's what they have. They have spending per completion, which you, I'm sure, understand that number more before. But I presume that's the amount of money it costs to get a kid to graduate.
Yeah,
right?
we might even be able to do that because I can tell you that if you sort of do 34% divided by this, it actually looks pretty good compared to the ratio of that to this, right?
Right.
That's probably what you're going to tell us.
It's pretty much. So we see on the private national average is $95,000 for spending per completion. In Massachusetts, the privates are actually at $133,000. And then since we're on Harvard's campus,
Yeah.
Harvard's number is $343,000. They got a lot of money here.
Does that include the business school?
They all sit on their own bottom, so we don't talk about that, right? So, yeah, so that's a huge number. And then when we look at Massachusetts, actually in the University of Amherst campus, we do pretty well. We spent $78,000 to get that. But $78,000 compared to $343 is a marked difference that I think we need to look at. But and even when you tie us to the national average, the national public average in Massachusetts is $66,000, and the national, I don't know what I said, Massachusetts average is 66, the national average is only 68. So we're spending about the national average. We see in the private sector, the privates are spending substantially more than that. So I think, maybe it is that the cost of running a college or university here in Massachusetts is more expensive than running it in other places in the country, which makes our spending on public institutions probably lower than these numbers even reflect. One of the things that I wanted to bring up with, actually there's a couple things. One I raised was the issue of academic preparedness for these students. Where did they come from? Where did they go? And the other issue is you did have a wealth factor in your data, but you look. It seemed to be like it was almost like you were in poverty or you weren't, right?
Yeah.
So there was no socioeconomic stratification.
So unfortunately, in the data, this is a great data limitation that school systems don't collect data on your family income. They just know, are you receiving a subsidized lunch?
And then I think the other, and this is from my own experience, and my own experience as a representative dealing with all my constituents and talking about college, is another variable that would have been really interesting is, are these first-generation college students? Because that's the issue. So when I go out and I talk to kids, who takes advantage of the Adams Scholarship? A lot of times those are first-generation college students. And some of that is, and this is anecdotal, but it's experiential. It's my experience, so I can talk about it. And even my daughter graduated in that class, which was, I think, was in 2004 or so. What was the first class that got the Adams Scholarship? 05. She graduated in 05 then. She was one of the first students to get the Adams Scholarship. She got the Adams Scholarship, and I looked at the letter, and it was like, this isn't going to make it, honey. This is, it's. I knew what it was. I knew it didn't take in the fees. She was a good student, applied to schools, applied to a broad range of schools, and then we compared financial aid packages, right? And her financial aid package, at the time Northeastern was trying to recruit students like her, gave her a phenomenal package. It was way less expensive for her to go to Northeastern than it was to one of the public institutions. And I think that part of that is that issue that I'm getting at is that sort of first generation of what happens, is that these first generation families and maybe folks that are in the lower socioeconomic status come in and they don't understand the subtleties of what it is they're looking at, and when they're shopping, they don't actually see what they're shopping for. That's a little off the point, but I think it's something worth thinking about as we move ahead and how we look at that. The other thing is that when you look at the college graduation rates, typically what we've been using is we use the iPads, right, which is the 6-year graduation rate. And the 6-year graduation rates, we actually stack up pretty much where everybody else is. So the national public average is 56%. Massachusetts is actually 56.4% and that's the standard that's used nationally. So nationally, our public institutions are no different than public institutions across the country. The national average for private institutions for the 6-year graduation rate is approximately 65%. And for Massachusetts, the average is 75%. So we're, one of the things I think that happens is for me as to talk about public institutions and public higher education, the issue we have in Massachusetts is an issue that doesn't exist in other parts of the country, right? So we have great institutions, public institutions here of higher education. but we have superstars on the private side. We have the world leaders here on the private side. You know, not only this campus, but only within a few miles of this campus, right? So we're always sort of, as on the public side, sort of this battle between public institutions here in Massachusetts, where we have this huge, you know, robust, for lack of a better word, private institutions here. And we actually have more students, from my understanding, I could be wrong on this, more students in the private side than we do in the public side, which is the only state in the country that has that dichotomy. So part of what we see here is at least my view, is we're looking at the comparison between public institutions and private institutions. And what are we doing? And part of my concern, obviously, is that we're trying to fund these public institutions as best we can, but obviously money has some impact on this. The other issue, I think, that may lead some other folks to the public institutions is the issue of debt. And where are you going with debt? And how much debt do you want to graduate with? That's a big issue, and I do have the numbers here somewhere, but I don't know exactly where they are. But I think the numbers are, you graduate from a public institution with an average of like $10,000 in debt in Massachusetts, and from a private institution it's like $22,000, so like double the debt. But, you know, still within a reasonable part. Let me see if I have some other. The other issue, and we can talk about this offline, is some of the data points we used. You used national average when you looked at. We actually got some data from the Board of Higher Education in Massachusetts, and I can go over those numbers with you after. But those numbers tended to be substantially different. I'm not exactly sure what that is. And I didn't run the regression analysis, I'm sorry. So I don't really know whether...
We'll do it.
I don't know whether they're really statistically significant or not. The other piece is that there's a few pieces. One is there's good news from people attending public institutions and people that live here in Massachusetts, is that we are making concerted effort to make our public institutions, one, more responsive, and two, to make, essentially to get a better product. One of the things that we have is the Vision project, which you may have heard about in Massachusetts. How do we align the institutions? How do we move them ahead? What do we do? We're also looking at issues we did a community college reform in this last legislative session, where we looked at how do we fund the institutions, at least the community colleges. And what we did is we increased their funding, but we also put performance metrics. And the performance metric that we put the most weight on is you get money when you get a student through the process. So that the impetus would always be, we're concerned about graduation rates. That's exactly the way we want to move. The Adams Scholarship, we could talk about presidential election, we could talk about Mitt Romney. We know this was his baby, and I think that's part of why you don't see our President Governor Deval Patrick signing the letter, which I think, Josh, wasn't lost on you. But I think that's part of the issue. This is important information on how we spend our money here in Massachusetts. How do we make a better public institution? Because there's a huge value in public institutions. And one of the things that I was trying to point out was the issue of access. One of the concerns we always have is at public institutions is, does everybody in Massachusetts have access, and do they have the same opportunity as everyone else? And I think that's one of the biggest things that we struggle with, is this issue of access. We want to make sure that there's public institutions so that everybody has the same opportunity to go through and have to gain the same thing. So anyway, thank you for inviting me here, and we're going to do an arm wrestling match after this. I don't know. All right, but thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Any questions for me, or?
I'll just say one or two things that occurred to me when you're talking. One is it's definitely true that when you look at 5- and 6-year graduation rates from these institutions, that they are very much higher than the 4-year rates. We actually can, so one of the issues is that some of the younger kids in this data haven't yet been out of high school for that long. When we look at the very first couple of cohorts, where we can look out 5 or 6 years from them, story actually here doesn't change very much. We think this is not just a story of people being delayed in their graduation, but actually disappearing entirely. That something just goes wrong when they come to these campuses.
So the other piece too, and I didn't get into this, so if you get a student who's a first year, a first generation student, you have students coming, and that's part of what I was talking about with this different socioeconomic strata. If you have students that are coming with different pressures to the public institutions, where, like I know, and this is more anecdotal information, I apologize for that, but even in we have a campus in my district, which is Framingham State University. Most of those students are working, and some of them are working full-time. So we have lots of students because they need to do that, because whether they're supporting themselves or their families, or they just need to do this to survive, you know, there's pressures on them, on the students that are attending public institutions that have nothing to do with the public institution itself.
So let me say two things. That is absolutely true. I will say two things. The comparison we're doing in this paper between these kids and these kids, who are basically identical in all these ways. So whatever.
But not socioeconomic status, because we didn't have.
No, that's it. I mean, that's.
But you only cut out poverty or not, right?
No, we haven't cut out anything. Look, so what we've done is take all the kids in Massachusetts who score exactly at the sort of minimum score they need, and all the kids who missed that one question right.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If you look at these two sets of kids on average, they look the same in all regards: socioeconomic, ethnic, gender, etc. We actually haven't controlled for anything in these pictures. So that's one comment. The other comment I'll make is that I actually sort of glossed over this in one of my slides. We see this really striking pattern, which is if you divide up the school districts in Massachusetts into the sort of highest scoring half and the lowest scoring half as measured by MCAS, and then you do this analysis separately for those two sets of districts, all of this negative graduation effect here is actually coming from the higher scoring districts. And the reason is that if those kids who would have gone to some of these elite private colleges, and by giving them up, actually are sort of losing something, and their graduation rates are suffering, kids from the lower scoring districts that switch into the Umass campuses are switching in from other colleges that actually, I think, have some of the same sort of funding struggles and other things. And the result is their graduation rates turn out not to suffer at all. So if anything, this is a bizarre story where the more elite you are, the more you have done something a little screwy by sacrificing an opportunity for a small amount of money.
So coming out is a bad thing if the leader. No.
Right. So I think we would like to produce more college degrees in general, regardless of who is earning them.
So I think one of my points is, I think I'm still stuck on those two dots there.
The two dots, yeah, okay.
So, but one of the points is, we don't know who the students are that chose the private institution versus the students that chose the public institution.
So the set of students who would react to this letter by switching, by saying, oh, I'm going to give up the opportunity to go to Suffolk or Endicott or BC, or whatever my alternative was, and come into the UMass campus, those might be an unusual set of students. It could be that they have particular financial struggles and that this scholarship money means an extra, it's particularly meaningful to them. So I grant you a set of kids who are sort of switching campuses as a result of this letter might be an unusual set of kids. The way that statisticians think of this is to say, we still got a valid experiment here. We're still comparing two basically identical sets of kids, but the results we're seeing are based on an unusual subset of those kids who are reacting. So maybe we wouldn't want to hugely generalize to the whole population about them. For statisticians, that's the difference between internal and external validity. I don't know if that's come up in your applied regression class yet.
We already had that.
Oh, you had that one. Oh, that one. It's great. Thank God. It's unbelievable to talk to people about this. So I don't disagree. I think the set of kids who might be switching colleges as a result of this are probably unusual. It may be a set of kids whose parents are not super well informed about the kind of trade-offs they might be making between campuses in terms of financial aid packages. I grant you all of that. I will also say, though, remember, this is targeting the top 25% of high school graduates in every class. So we're not talking about the sort of middle or bottom of the sort of academic skill distribution. This is a pretty talented set of students. And so it's one of the reasons this research is a little bit unusual. We often focus on this college access questions for kids who are sort of more on the margin of should I go to college or not. But one way to think of this is, if you take the kids who are just on the threshold of winning the Adams Scholarship, almost 80% of them are going off to a four-year college the fall after they graduate. So this is a pretty high And obviously as the test scores rise, that number even gets higher. So we are talking about a subset of the Massachusetts student population that is actually quite academically talented and goes to college at very high rates, all of which is a good thing. I mean, I think the state is doing really well in that regard. Anyway, so I'll stop there because I feel like other people have comments and thoughts from us.
I was wondering why you chose to focus on the Adams Scholarship for this research. Was it a request from the state or?
No, it was not a request from the state. In fact, the state maybe would have rather we didn't do it. It caused some people some headaches. Long story short is, many years ago when I was in graduate school, I needed to write a paper to earn my PhD, and I looked around for policies that might be interesting to evaluate and sort of stumbled across the Adams Scholarship. I wrote a first version of this paper many years ago in which the outcomes data we had was much less good. And as a result, we couldn't actually study things like college completion. We could only look at that very initial decision about where they went. So this was basically Sarah, my co-author, coming to me after she took a class with me and saying, hey, now we've got the data to follow up that paper, let's follow it up. And it turns out to be a really nice kind of thing to study because there's this very clean sort of natural experiment going on that you can find these two sets of kids who are nearly identical in terms of their test scores, but you hand one of them sort of a voucher for, or a certificate for $1,700 a year if they want to use it. So it just sort of is an easy thing to study in some ways relative to some of the stuff we do. And I will say, by the way, when we started this project, we did not expect to see this pattern. We expected to write a paper about here's what the Adams Scholarship is doing to enrollment and graduation. We didn't have the phrase, we weren't thinking about things like college quality measured in any way. We just didn't, it's sort of when we saw this pattern, we started to think, what's driving that pattern? Then we started looking at things like, well, what colleges are kids giving up to come to UMass? How do those colleges compare in terms of their characteristics?
Did you look at grade point average at all in there?
So very frustratingly, the outcomes data we have, so the outcomes data we have is from something called the National Student Clearinghouse, which tracks basically the enrollment of students. So are you enrolled at any moment in time and whether you graduated or not. We don't know anything about the courses kids are doing, their GPAs while
on the K-12 side.
Oh, sorry, say that again?
On the K-12 side, where the students did track.
Oh, no, the state does not track students' GPA. Is it starting to? It will start not for these kids because the data systems are getting better with time. What I will say is that there are very good statistical reasons to think that if you take these two sets of kids that have nearly identical MCAS scores, if we had their GPAs, I would be willing to bet you large sums of money that they would look almost identical as well, because that's the way averages just tend to work out. So any variable we can look at in our data about these kids and these kids, so things like gender, race, ethnicity, low income status, etc., all of those variables look identical, and so I would suspect that GPA would also look identical, but we just can't see it.
The numbers that you have are a little off from what the Department has too, in terms of amount paid or the spending per year.
Oh, yes,
also, just the number of kids that are involved. In some cases, kind of large. I mean, you seem to be counting a total of about 12,000 kids.
Where?
In one of your, what the traffic's online talks about 12,000 Adams users. Is that what you?
I don't remember the number offhand.
Yeah. When in fact during that period, the highest number was 1,000.
I mean, I'd be surprised if our numbers were that far off because they basically are the official. I mean, they are the numbers, so because we know where every kid goes to college. So.
But you don't know whether they continued on to get the Adams Scholarship or not.
Well, if they enrolled in one of these in-state public colleges and they qualified, then they were receiving it. But
they didn't have none of they could either have they either could have not gone dropped into full part-time, which we can't.
That's true. They would stop receiving. That's true.
Not
yeah.
have continue to have a 3.0
That's
GPA,
true.
So
yeah, which makes it all the more remarkable that we see these negative effects, right? That's true. They can lose eligibility if their GPA drops below a certain amount, or if they're no longer enrolled full time. That's absolutely true. But in some sense, that's not. It doesn't really matter if what we're trying to do is evaluate the impact of the existence of the scholarship, right? That's just sort of.
But the numbers that we have are effective.
Maybe let's talk afterwards. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's right. I don't think the numbers we really care about from the state's perspective are going to be affected by these things, but we can talk about that after. Yeah, Alex.
So where's the at some some papers will say that the quality of life is not necessarily improved and people's financial situation is not necessarily improved for going to college. Are we nowhere near that level at this break point?
I don't know any good papers that say that. I actually disagree with that. Every piece of reputable research you'll see will see that if
Education across
in general, on average, I mean, you can't say this for any individual student,
Sure.
but on average,
And
completing a college degree is a good thing. But completing a 2-year degree is better than a high school diploma. Completing a 4-year degree is better than a degree on average.
Okay.
And even conditional on, take 2 people, both of whom completed 4-year degrees. In general, the one who went to a higher quality college, and we can talk about how exactly that's measured, will also have a better job later in life.
What is the time trend? So this is a snapshot of 2004.
It's the graduating high school classes. Well, sorry, this table is actually the high school class of 2004 because we were just trying to measure some things before the scholarship kicked in. The rest of the data and the results I've been showing you have been the graduating high school classes of 2005 through 2007. So sort of the first 3 cohorts of kids who are eligible.
Are these rates roughly flat? Or?
That's a great question. I don't remember. That's a very good question. And someone asked me this question. We should make a picture of these rates over time. Yeah, that's a good question.
I just want to make sure I don't walk out of here and misunderstand. So the kids who are on either side of the threshold are probably most at risk of being negatively affected.
So I think that that's also a very good question. So I think that the way to think of it is the comparison we keep doing in the paper, because we're trying to we always want to be trying to compare 2 sets of kids who would otherwise be identical to make this a clean kind of experiment. So we're always comparing sort of these kids with these kids. In some sense, we can't really use that technique to tell you what's the impact of the scholarship on the kids over here, because we don't know who to compare them to who would be identical but didn't receive the scholarship, because everyone around here receives a scholarship. So all the results we're talking about are sort of are being driven by kids near the threshold. I don't really want to make strong claims about what's happening to kids with super high test scores, for example. I don't have anyway, yeah.
Okay. And then just one little follow-up is, so if you could amend the policy, what course might you take?
Great question. I think there are, roughly speaking, 2 possibilities. One is just get rid of it and think about taking that revenue and using it in what I would think of almost anything would be more productive in my mind than the way the revenue is being used right now. Hiring more faculty at the Umass campuses, or providing more financial aid to students, or slowing the rate of tuition, fee increase among those campuses, all of which would be possibilities. That's one. If, on the other hand, we sort of like the basic idea of a merit scholarship, and there are reasons that it's appealing. We like the idea of sort of rewarding high-scoring kids, which maybe we think that helps motivate kids to do some effort. It feels good. I certainly don't disagree with that. One thing we could do is to think about sort of potentially sort of adding some kind of means test to it, or something where we would say, look, if you're a wealthy kid and you score this high, we'll give you some, I would hope, symbolic amount of aid, not a substantial amount of aid, because if you're wealthy, that's sort of a waste of taxpayers' money. On the other hand, the lower your income is, maybe the higher this aid would get. So the idea would be, from a purely sort of, with my pure economist hat on, ignoring all the politics, and that's, I know, a very dangerous thing to do, the right way to design financial aid programs is to have them basically, that the generosity of the aid should be larger the higher your academic skill, because we really want those kids to go to school, to college, but it should also be larger the poorer you are. And so the notion is the amounts of aid available should be the highest for low-income, really smart kids, because those are the ones that would be a real waste if they weren't going to college. And everyone else, we would sort of shrink the amount of aid. So that would be the other possibility for sort of thinking about modifying something like this.
So even if you raise that passing threshold, you would expect to find the same data that have the same outcome?
You mean raise it from 25% to...
Or the whatever the score is, the passing score.
I see.
You would expect to find the same results?
I mean, so that's a really interesting question. Yeah, so you could have said, look, let's only give this thing to the top 10% of kids in Massachusetts. I think that would actually probably be even a worse policy, because, again, yeah, so we live in a world, fortunately or unfortunately, in which test scores are highly correlated with income. So anytime you're sort of targeting aid on the basis of test scores, you know that a large chunk of your aid is flowing to kids who have more money. It doesn't mean that you want to cut sort of test scores and academic skill out of the story entirely, but you have to be aware that when you're directing aid in this way, it's mostly going to not the poorest kids in your current state.
exhausted the audience's questions?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to stick around for as long as it takes to, talk about, figure out whatever we can figure out.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Professor Goodman and Representative Sannicandro for joining us. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and please do come to our next event. Thanks so much.